Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Some counselors, especially those working at a college or at a public agency, may get to see a client only once for lack of time or because the client no-shows after the first appointment. And even if you do get multiple sessions with a client, it's often wise to front load the first session. That is, to accomplish as much as possible to avoid the client concluding, oh, all I did was tell him about myself. I already knew all that. I don't think that further sessions are worth the time and maybe the money. When a counselor knows or senses that it may be a one-shot opportunity, all's not lost. Here's one approach to one-session career counseling. I would imagine that some of this would also be applicable to a wider range of counselors, therapists, and coaches. In my experience, clients are happy to complete a probing new client questionnaire in advance, especially when I explain that I'll study it before the session and that it's going to be the springboard for the session so that we can make the most of our time together. You can find mine by if you just Google Marty Nemko and new client questionnaire, you'll find it. In any case, that's the questionnaire that I typically use with clients who are seeking their first career or career change. Of course, it's easier to make the most of a session when the client completes the questionnaire because it covers questions that could take a few sessions to answer live. Plus, because the client completes it at his or her own pace, the client can take all the time necessary to mull and to change answers. But let's assume the client doesn't complete a new client questionnaire. Of course, every client's different, but here's a typical way I might start a session with a client who wants to choose a career. 1. As soon as the client walks in or calls in, I look for something to make them feel good about themselves because they may be nervous seeing a counselor. Often, if they seem verbal and not shy, after saying, "Hi, I'm Marty Nemko," I'll shut up and listen and then respond with something like, I never noticed that, or good point. 2. After a minute or so of small talk that typically builds on what they say, I invite the client to record the session on their phone. I'll say something like, clients find the recording even more valuable than the session because you have the time to stop the recording and reflect. It's kind of like getting a second session for free. If they don't know how to record on their phone, I ask if I can show them, and they're always glad I did. 3. Next, I'm going to ask something like, so what are you hoping to get out of our work together? Or more often, because they've emailed me or phoned me in requesting to work with me, I already have a sense of that. So I'll ask something like, is your primary goal in working with me still to find a new career? 4. A next question I might ask might be, are there any careers you're already seriously considering? I might well say, would you give me a few clues as to who you are, your special interests, abilities, limitations? 5. In a one-session career counseling session, I might use their answer to that series of questions I just mentioned, the special interests, abilities, and limitations, plus what I've learned about them from their initial query to me, or of course from the new client questionnaire, to move on to what I call the optometry game. In that quote game, as an optometrist does, I give the client two choices of career and ask them to pick which feels better. I then substitute another career for the career that they didn't prefer, and I keep repeating that process until the client keeps choosing the same career. Like nurse, 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 nurse is the one that always wins. I then say, okay, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 meaning the idea makes you, the career makes you puke, and 10 means it gives you ecstasy, what does that career, say nursing, score? Unless the client says 10, I ask the magic question. What keeps it from being a 10? I then suggest a career that might address their concern about the career, and then ask what that scores on the meter. And I keep going until a career scores at least a 9. And usually if it ends up only at a 9 rather than a 10, it's because they say they don't know enough about the career to give it a 10. At that point, I would say, fair enough. So I'll say, pretend I know everything in the world about that career. What question would you want to ask me? And if I don't know the answer, we go to the computer and we do a Google search to find an answer. If that research results in their being turned off to the career, we repeat the above process. But at some point, usually sooner than later, they're usually feeling good about a particular career, whereupon I'll say, of course, that's only one possibility. It would be good if you could walk out of here today with 2 or 3 to research. I might then recapitulate that entire process where we identified a career that scores at least a 9. Toward the end of the session, if there are 2 or 3 careers that remain of interest, I might say, I'm going to play a lawyer and make the best case I can for career number one. Then I'll become the opposing counsel and make the best case I can for the other career. Then you be the judge and you give your decision as to which wins and why. Almost always, by the end of the session, the client remains interested in at least one career. If so, I'll ask, okay, what homework would you want to do to further investigate whether that career really is a good fit? If the client can't come up with something reasonable, I typically offer two alternative assignments and ask whether he or she wants to do one, both, or neither. When we've agreed on a homework assignment, I ask, okay, let's pretend we're in Vegas. Should we bet big that you would do the homework? If the client says no, I ask, what do you think is the reason or two you wouldn't? That often unearths a psychological block such as fear of rejection or of embarrassment or confusion about how to do the homework. We then take a little time to address the issue. If we can't adequately address it within the time we have that day, I say something like, good, that's perfect fodder for our next session. Should we figure out a next time to get together? Again, every client is different, but this model, that is, getting right to the problem without an open-ended tell me about yourself, which could take 20 minutes unless you're interrupting, and instead moving to possible solutions by offering 2 or 3 choices using techniques such as the optometry game, the lawyer game, and the Vegas game, can enable great progress in merely one session. In any event, I thank you for watching. I welcome you giving a thumbs up and tolerate a thumbs down, your comments, your sharing on social media, and subscribing to my channel. And in any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.